Alina Rodriguez stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, watching the bustling streets of Manhattan, 40 stories below. At 28, she had built Titan Industries into a defense technology empire worth billions. Her reflection showed a woman of steel, sharp business suit, perfectly styled dark hair, and eyes that had never shown weakness to the corporate sharks circling her company. The intercom buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. "Miss Rodriguez, the board meeting is ready," announced Nina Chen, her trusted assistant and one of the few people Alina considered an ally. Alina straightened her shoulders and walked into the boardroom where 12 stern faces awaited her. At the head of the table sat Richard Blackstone, her late father's business partner and current board chairman. His silver hair and grandfatherly smile had always made Alina uncomfortable, though she couldn't pinpoint why. "Alina, my dear," Richard began, his voice carrying false warmth. "We've reviewed your father's will again, and I'm afraid the clause is quite clear. You must be married within 6 months of his death to maintain controlling interest in Titan Industries." The room fell silent. Alina felt the eyes of every board member studying her reaction. Her father, Miguel Rodriguez, had died in a car accident just 4 months ago, leaving behind a company and a daughter he trained to be ruthless in business, but vulnerable in personal matters. "That clause is archaic and possibly illegal," Alina replied, her voice steady, despite the storm brewing inside her chest. Richard leaned back in his leather chair. "Nevertheless, it's legally binding. You have 8 weeks remaining. You find a husband, or the board will vote to remove you as CEO."
Alina's
jaw tightened. She had suspected this moment would come, but hearing it officially made her blood run cold. "And I suppose you have candidates in mind? Several suitable gentlemen from respected families? Men who understand the defense industry and could provide?" "Stability," Richard said, sliding a folder across the mahogany table. Alina didn't touch the folder. "I'll handle this myself." That evening, Alina sat in her penthouse apartment, staring at the city lights while nursing a glass of wine. The weight of her father's legacy pressed down on her shoulders. Miguel had built Titan Industries from nothing, creating revolutionary defense systems that protected soldiers worldwide. The thought of losing it to Richard's manipulation made her stomach churned. Her phone rang. Nina's voice came through the speaker. "I've been thinking about your situation. If we approach this differently?" "I'm listening." "Instead of finding someone from the board's list, what about someone with no connections to the company? Someone you could control completely?" Elena's interest piqued. "Go on. Someone who needs the money enough to sign a contract. No emotional complications. Just business." The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Alina had always preferred business arrangements to messy emotional entanglements. "Find me candidates. People with no ambitions, no connections to our industry. People who understand that this is purely transactional." The night cleaner 3 days later, Alina found herself working late again, reviewing security protocols for their latest government contract. The offices were empty except for the skeleton crew of security guards and maintenance staff. She barely noticed the man quietly emptying trash cans and mopping floors, just another invisible worker keeping the corporate machine running. James Parker moved through the Titan Industries building with practiced efficiency. To everyone else, he was simply the night janitor who'd worked there for 6 months. He kept his head down, spoke little, and did his job without complaint. What they didn't know was that every night, he memorized security patterns, guard rotations, and access points. His real mission had nothing to do with cleaning floors. Former Navy SEAL Commander James Parker had been recruited by a classified government task force to investigate potential security breaches at Titan Industries. Intelligence suggested that someone was selling military technology to foreign buyers, and James's cover as a janitor gave him access to areas where electronic surveillance would be detected. On this particular night, as James cleaned the executive floor, he noticed Alina Rodriguez still at her desk. He'd observed her for months, the way she carried herself with absolute authority, how she treated employees with distant professionalism, and the isolated life she lived despite her wealth and power. There was something almost tragic about her dedication to a company that seemed to consume everything else in her life. Alina looked up as James emptied her wastebasket. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she was struck by something unexpected in his gaze. Most people looked at her with either fear, greed, or ambition. This man's eyes held none of those things, just a quiet intelligence that seemed to see more than he revealed. You work late hours, Elena said, surprising herself by speaking to someone she usually ignored. James straightened, his military posture unconsciously asserting itself before he caught himself and slouched slightly. Yes, ma'am. Easier to work when the offices are empty. His voice was deeper than Elena expected, with an accent she couldn't place. There was something about his calm presence that made her feel less alone in the vast, empty building. What's your name? She asked. James Parker, ma'am? Elena nodded and returned to her work, but she found herself glancing up as James continued his methodical cleaning. When he disappeared around the corner, she felt an odd sense of loss. The proposition 2 weeks passed before Elena saw James again. This time, she was leaving the building after midnight when she encountered him in the parking garage. A group of 3 men had cornered him near the dumpsters, and Elena could hear raised voices echoing off the concrete walls. We know you've got money saved up, one of the men was saying. Just hand it over, and nobody gets hurt. Elena should have called security or simply driven away. Instead, she found herself stepping out of her car. Is there a problem here? 3 men turned toward her, taking in her expensive clothes and confident demeanor. The leader, a thin man with nervous energy, laughed. Lady, you picked the wrong time to play hero. Why don't you just get back in your fancy car and drive away? What happened next shocked Elena to her core. James moved with a speed and precision that transformed him from a mild-mannered janitor into something deadly. The first attacker went down with a precise strike to the throat. The second found his arm twisted behind his back before he could react. The third turned to run but stumbled as James swept his legs with surgical accuracy. Within 30 seconds, all 3 men were on the ground, groaning in pain.
Ow.
James stood over them, breathing normally, as if he'd just finished mopping a floor. Instead of dismantling 3 attackers, call the police, James said to Elena, his voice carrying an authority she'd never heard from him before. As they waited for the police to arrive, Elena studied James with new eyes, his posture the way. He scanned for additional threats. The controlled violence she'd just witnessed, none of it matched the profile of a simple janitor. Where did you learn to fight like that? She asked. James met her gaze steadily. Here and there, you pick things up. The police arrived, took statements, and arrested the would-be muggers. As they drove away, Elena found herself alone with James. In the empty parking garage, I owe you a debt, she said. James shook his head. No debt. Anyone would have done the same. No, Elena replied firmly. Not anyone. Most people would have called for help or run away. Put yourself at risk for someone you barely know. Something in her voice made James look at her more carefully. For the first time, he saw past the Ice Queen facade to the woman underneath. There was loneliness there, and a vulnerability she worked hard to hide. Would you like to get coffee? Elena asked impulsively. I know an all-night diner. James hesitated. His cover required him to maintain distance from company executives, but something about Elena's request felt genuine rather than suspicious. All right. They drove separately to a small diner on the outskirts of the city, sitting across from each. Other in a vinyl booth, Elena found herself talking more openly than she had in years. The stress of the board's ultimatum, the weight of her father's legacy, the isolation of her position, it all poured out to this quiet man who listened without judgment. I have 8 weeks to find a husband, she said finally. Not because I want to get married, but because my father's will requires it. If I don't, I lose everything he built. James absorbed this information while sipping his black coffee. That's quite a situation. Elena studied his face, noting again the intelligence in his eyes and the calm way he processed information. An idea began forming in her mind. Crazy, impractical, but potentially brilliant. What if I offered you a job? She said slowly. I have a job. A different kind of job. One that pays very well and requires very little actual work. Elena leaned forward. What if I offered you $50,000 to marry me? James's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. He set it down carefully and looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. It would be a business arrangement, Elena continued, her confidence building as she spoke. A 1-year contract. Get married on paper. You receive a generous monthly stipend, and after a year, we get divorced. No emotional complications, no interference in each other's lives. It's just a mutually beneficial transaction. The silence stretched between them as James considered her proposal. Alina held her breath, suddenly realizing how much she hoped he would say yes. Not just because she needed a husband, but because something about James Parker made her feel safer than she had in months. "Why me?" James asked finally. "Because you have no connections to my company, no apparent ambitions beyond your current life, and you just proved you're trustworthy," Alina replied. "Plus, I suspect you could use the money." James was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing. Through the implications, accepting would give him unprecedented access to Titan Industries and Alina herself. It would also complicate his mission in ways his handlers could never have anticipated. 100,000, he said finally. Lena blinked in surprise. She'd expected him to negotiate, but the amount was still well within her means. Agreed. Shook hands across the diner table, sealing an arrangement that would change both their lives in ways neither could predict. 3 weeks later, they stood before a judge in a simple civil ceremony. Alina wore a white business suit. James wore the only suit he owned, a slightly worn black one that somehow looked perfect on his tall frame. Nina Chen and a courthouse employee served as witnesses, as they exchanged vows that meant nothing and everything. Alina caught herself studying James's face. He spoke the words with quiet sincerity, as if he understood the weight of promises, even when they were meant to be temporary. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, James leaned in to kiss her cheek. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through Elena's system, and she found herself wondering if this business arrangement might become more complicated than she'd planned. That night, James moved into the guest room of Elena's penthouse. They established clear boundaries, separate lives, minimal interaction, and absolute discretion about the true nature of their arrangement. Neither of them suspected that their marriage was about to become the least of their problems. As forces within Titan Industries prepared to make their move against Elena's leadership, the quiet janitor she'd married for convenience was about to become the most dangerous man her enemies had ever encountered. 2 months into their arrangement, Alina began noticing things about her contract husband that didn't add up. James kept irregular hours beyond his janitorial shift, received encrypted phone calls he took in private, and moved through their shared space with the unconscious awareness of someone trained for combat. She first became suspicious when she found him awake at 3 a.m., sitting in the dark by their living room window, watching the street below with the focused attention of a sentinel. When she asked about his sleeplessness, he claimed old habits from military service, a detail he'd never mentioned before. The second red flag came when Alina hosted a dinner for potential investors. James, whom she'd intended to keep away from business functions, ended up serving as an impromptu host when several guests arrived early. His knowledge of military technology and defense contracts was far too sophisticated for someone whose background check showed only basic education in service industry jobs. "Your husband is quite knowledgeable," commented General Morrison, a Pentagon liaison who attended the dinner. "Where did he serve?" James deflected the question smoothly, but Alina caught the micro-expression of tension that crossed his face. That night, she confronted him directly. "Who are you really?" she demanded as they stood in the kitchen after. The guests had left. James was loading dishes into the dishwasher, his movements precise and economical. "I'm exactly who you married. James Parker, night janitor, temporary husband." "Temporary husbands don't usually know the technical specifications of guided missile systems," Alina shot back. "And they don't scan every room they enter like they're looking for threats." James straightened, and for a moment, Alina saw the man who had dismantled 3 attackers in the parking garage. Some habits are hard to break. "What habits? Aren't you telling me?" The sound of breaking glass from the living room cut through their conversation. Both of them froze as they heard the distinct whisper of footsteps on hardwood floors. Someone had entered their penthouse. James immediately shifted into combat mode, his entire demeanor changing in an instant. "Stay behind me," he whispered, moving toward the kitchen knives with lethal purpose. "When I signal, you run to the panic room." Elena's penthouse had been equipped with a secure room when she'd bought it, but she'd never expected to need it. Now, watching James prepare to confront intruders with deadly seriousness, she realized her quiet janitor husband was far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. 3 men in black, tactical gear moved through the apartment with professional precision. They weren't common burglars. Their equipment and movements marked them as military contractors or private security specialists. James recognized their formation and equipment immediately. These were the same type of operatives he'd worked with in classified missions overseas. The first man rounded the corner into the kitchen and found himself facing James Parker. But not the man who'd been quietly cleaning floors for months. This was Commander Parker, whose reputation in special operations circles was legendary. The intruder had exactly enough time to register his mistake before James disabled him with a combination of strikes that left him unconscious on the marble. Alina watched in stunned silence as her husband, K-Man she'd thought she was controlling, systematically neutralized 3 trained killers. His movements were fluid and precise, each action calculated to incapacitate rather than kill. Within 5 minutes, all 3 intruders were zip-tied and secured. While James checked their equipment and identification, professional contractors, he reported, examining their tactical gear, high-end equipment, military-grade weapons. Someone paid serious money to send them here. How do you know all this? Alina demanded, her voice shaking with adrenaline and confusion. James looked at her for a long moment, making a decision that would change everything between them. Because I used to command teams just like this one. The truth unveiled, as police sirens wailed in the distance. James finally revealed his true identity to Alina. He wasn't just a former soldier, he was former Navy SEAL Commander James Parker, holder of the Navy Cross and veteran of classified operations across 3 continents. More importantly, he was currently working undercover for a joint FBI-Pentagon task force investigating security breaches at Titan Industries. Your company has been hemorrhaging classified information for months, James explained as they waited for law enforcement to arrive. Someone's been selling your military contracts to foreign buyers? My team was inserted to identify the source. Lena felt the world spinning around her. Everything she thought she knew was a lie. Her marriage, her husband, even the security of her own company. So marrying me was just part of your mission? No, James said firmly. The marriage was never part of the plan. When you propositioned me, I saw an opportunity for deeper access, but... He paused, struggling with emotions he'd trained himself to suppress. But what happened between us? That's real. Before Alina could respond, the apartment filled with FBI agents and NYPD officers. The next several hours passed in a blur of questions, statements, and security briefings. Alina learned that the attack on their apartment had been triggered by increased activity around her company's most classified projects. Someone knew that investigators were getting close to the truth. Agent Torres, the FBI team leader, briefed them on the scope of the investigation. We believe there's a conspiracy involving board members, military contractors, and foreign intelligence services. The technology Titan Industries develops isn't just being sold, it's being modified to create backdoors in American defense systems. Elena's blood ran cold. Implications were staggering, not just financial fraud, but potential threats to national security. How high does this go? We're not sure yet, Agent Torres admitted. That's why Commander Parker's position has been so valuable. He's been able to access areas and information that our traditional surveillance couldn't reach. Lena looked at James with new understanding. His night shift schedule hadn't just been about cleaning, it had given him access to the building. When sensitive work was being conducted, his janitorial role had been the perfect cover for an intelligence-gathering operation. What happens now? Alina asked. Now we set a trap, James replied. But it's going to require your full cooperation, and it's going to be dangerous. The corporate conspiracy. Over the next week, Alina learned the full extent of the conspiracy threatening her company. Richard Blackstone, the man she'd trusted as her father's friend and business partner, was at the center of a network selling Titan's most advanced military technology to international buyers. The scheme was sophisticated and had been running for over 2 years. Blackstone and his co-conspirators would allow Titan's legitimate research and development to create cutting-edge defense systems. Then they would arrange for field testing failures that required the technology to be recalled and supposedly destroyed. Instead of destruction, the recalled systems were modified and sold to foreign military contractors at enormous profits. Your father discovered the pattern just before his death, Colonel Harrison, James's former commanding officer, explained during a secure briefing. The car accident that killed him wasn't random. Someone made sure he couldn't expose what he'd found Alina felt tears burning her eyes as the truth about her father's death sank in. Miguel Rodriguez hadn't died in a tragic accident. He'd been murdered for trying to protect the company he'd built and the soldiers who depended on his technology. We have evidence linking Blackstone to the conspiracy, but we need proof of his direct involvement in the technology transfers, Agent Torres continued. That's where you come in, Mrs. Parker. Alina started at hearing her married name from an FBI agent. The fake marriage that had started as a business arrangement now felt more real than anything else in her life. What do you need me to do? Asked James, leaned forward. We need you to act normal, continue running the company, but give us access to board meetings and executive communications. We'll gather the evidence we need to bring down the entire network, and if they suspect something, then things get very dangerous very quickly, James replied honestly. These people have already killed to protect their operation. They won't hesitate to eliminate anyone they see as a threat. Lena squared her shoulders. My father died protecting this company and the people it serves. I won't let his killers profit from his murder. The next phase of the investigation required Elena to walk a dangerous line. She had to maintain her normal CEO responsibilities while secretly working with the FBI task force. Every board meeting, every executive decision, every interaction with Richard Blackstone had to appear natural while she gathered intelligence that could expose the conspiracy. James provided her with sophisticated recording equipment disguised as jewelry and everyday items. Their penthouse became a secure command center where Alina debriefed after each day of undercover work. The strange intimacy of sharing secrets and danger began to blur the lines of their contract marriage in ways neither had anticipated. You're remarkably good at this, James observed one evening as Alina reviewed recordings from a particularly sensitive board meeting. I've been pretending to be something I'm not my entire career, Alina replied. Playing the Ice Queen, the untouchable CEO. This is just another performance. But James saw through her facade. No, it's not. What you're doing now takes real courage. The person I met that night in the parking garage, the woman who propositioned a stranger in a diner, that's who you really are. Needs to be done, regardless of the cost. Their eyes met across the secure communication equipment, and Alina felt something shift between them. The attraction had always been there, simmering beneath their professional arrangement. Now with danger surrounding them, and truth finally spoken, that attraction was becoming something deeper and more dangerous than either had planned. James, she said softly, but he held up a hand. After this is over, he said, when the mission is complete and you're safe, then we can figure out what this is between us. Alina nodded, understanding the wisdom of his restraint, even as her heart ached with want. They were walking into the most dangerous phase of the operation. Emotional complications could get them both killed. The trap was set. Richard Blackstone and his co-conspirators had no idea that their next major technology transfer would be their last. But as Alina prepared for the most important performance of her life, neither she nor James suspected that their enemies had already discovered the truth about their marriage and were planning their own deadly counter-strict boardroom at Titan. Industries had never felt more like a battlefield. Alina sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her expression calm despite the recording equipment hidden in her jewelry and the knowledge that every word spoken would be evidence in a federal case. Around the table sat the 12 board members who controlled the company's future, including 3 conspirators who had betrayed everything her father had built. Richard Blackstone called the meeting to order with his usual grandfatherly smile. But Alina now recognized the predator lurking beneath his pleasant exterior. Beside him sat David Kumar, Titan's head of security. His investigation, she now knew, had been designed to hide rather than expose the security breaches. The third conspirator, board member Patricia Wells, maintained her reputation as a sharp financial analyst while secretly managing the money laundering operation that cleaned the profits from their illegal technology sales. Today we're reviewing the final specifications for the Phoenix defense system, Blackstone announced, referring to Titan's most advanced missile interception technology. The Pentagon has approved full deployment to overseas bases. Lena's pulse quickened. According to the FBI briefing, this was the technology transfer they'd been waiting for. The Phoenix system represented 5 years of cutting-edge development and would be worth hundreds of millions to foreign buyers if it could be compromised and copied. I have some concerns about the security protocols, Alina said, playing her role as the cautious CEO. Given recent cyber attacks on defense contractors, shouldn't we implement additional safeguards? David Kumar leaned forward, his voice carrying false reassurance. Our security measures are more than adequate, Mrs. Parker. I've personally overseen every aspect of the Phoenix deployment. The use of her married name caught Elena's attention. For months, everyone at Titan had continued calling her Miss Rodriguez, honoring her preference to maintain her professional identity. Kumar's deliberate reference to her marriage felt like a subtle threat. Nevertheless, I think we should delay deployment until after a comprehensive security audit, Elena insisted. Sticking to the script she'd rehearsed with the FBI team, Blackstone's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Elena, my dear, you're letting anxiety cloud your judgment. The Pentagon is expecting delivery next week. We can't afford delays that might damage our relationship with our most important client. The meeting continued with seemingly routine discussions of logistics and timelines, but Elena caught subtle exchanges between the conspirators that confirmed the FBI's intelligence. The Phoenix system wasn't just being prepared for legitimate, military deployment, it was being set up for theft and modification. As the meeting adjourned, Blackstone approached Elena with fatherly concern. You seem tense, my dear. Perhaps you and your husband should take a vacation. I'm sure the company can manage without you for a week or two. The suggestion sounded innocent enough, but Elena heard the underlying message, leave town while we complete our operation. She smiled politely while her blood ran cold. It's thoughtful of you, Richard, but I couldn't leave during such a critical deployment. That evening, Elena and James reviewed the recordings in their secure penthouse command center. The FBI team, monitoring from a nearby surveillance van, confirmed that they had enough evidence to begin arrests. But they needed to catch the conspirators in the act of transferring the technology to prove the full scope of the conspiracy. Moving faster than we anticipated, Agent Torres reported through their encrypted communication system. Our sources indicate the technology transfer is planned for tomorrow night. James studied the building schematics spread across their dining table. They'll use the loading dock on the east side. Minimal security camera coverage, easy access to the highway, and David Kumar controls the security protocols for that area. Can you intercept them? Elena asked. Not alone, James replied. But with the right support and timing, we can catch them red-handed. Elena felt a chill of premonition. Throughout their relationship, she'd learned to read James's expressions, and she could see him calculating risks in his mind. What aren't you telling me? James met her eyes with grim honesty. Once we move against them tomorrow night, there's no going back. These people have killed to protect their operation. They won't surrender quietly. The next morning brought devastating news that changed everything. Elena arrived at her office to find Nina Chen, her trusted assistant, waiting with tears streaming down her face. They know, Nina whispered. Richard called me into his office this morning. He knows about the FBI investigation, about James's real identity, about everything. Elena's world tilted as she realized their operation had been compromised. How is that possible? I don't know, but they have photographs of James with his FBI handlers. They know about the recording equipment. They even know about the surveillance van parked outside. Elena immediately activated the emergency protocol. James had taught her, sending a coded message that would alert the FBI team. But even as she followed proper procedure, she knew they were walking into a trap. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Conference room A. Come alone. Your husband's life depends on it. Elena's hands shook as she read the message. Every instinct screamed danger, but the thought of James in the hands of people who had already committed murder made her decision easy. She would not let the man she'd come to love pay the price for her father's company. Conference room A was in the basement level of Titan Industries. It's typically used for sensitive client meetings that required maximum security. Elena rode the elevator down with her pulse pounding, knowing she was likely descending to her death but unable to abandon James. The conference room had been transformed into an interrogation center. James sat in a chair in the middle of the room, his hands zip-tied behind his back and blood trickling from a cut above his left eye. Around him stood 4 men Elena didn't recognize. Professional soldiers by their bearing and equipment. At the head of the conference table sat a man she'd never seen before, middle-aged with silver hair and cold eyes that studied her with predatory interest. Richard Blackstone stood beside him, no longer bothering to maintain his grandfatherly facade. Mrs. Parker, the unknown man said, his accent suggesting Eastern European origins. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Victor Cross, and I represent certain international interests that have been doing business with Mr. Blackstone. Alina forced herself to remain calm despite the terror coursing through her veins. What do you want? Originally, we simply wanted to complete our transaction and disappear with the Phoenix technology, Cross replied. However, your husband's interference has complicated matters considerably. Commander Parker's reputation precedes him. He's responsible for disrupting several of our operations over the years. James lifted his head, meeting Elena's eyes with a gaze that communicated both love and apology. She could see him calculating distances and angles, even in restraints, looking for any opportunity to fight back. The situation is quite simple, Cross continued. You're going to authorize the immediate transfer of the Phoenix system to our waiting transport. In exchange, both of you will live long enough to watch your company's technology protect the very enemies your father spent his life fighting against. Lena straightened her shoulders, channeling every ounce of authority she'd learned from her. Father, I won't help you betray my country. Cross's smile was arctic. I thought you might say that. He nodded to one of his men, who drew a pistol and pressed it against James's head. Lena, don't, James said firmly. Some things are worth dying for. The words broke Elena's heart and strengthened her resolve simultaneously. In that moment, she realized that their contract marriage had become the most real relationship of her life. James was willing to die rather than see her compromise her principles, and she loved him enough to find a way to save them both. Oh. Need to access the main server to authorize the transfer, she said finally. Cross studied her face, looking for deception. Ah! After a long moment, he nodded. Mr. Blackstone will escort you. Any attempt at trickery will result in your husband's immediate death. As they prepared to leave for the server room, Alina caught James's eye one more time. He gave her an almost imperceptible nod. He'd understood the real message in her capitulation. She wasn't surrendering. She was buying time and positioning. For their only chance at survival, the Phoenix rises the Titan Industries. Server room hummed with the sound of cooling systems and processing units that contained the company's most sensitive data. Alina stood before the main terminal while Richard Blackstone watched from the doorway, his pistol trained on her back. The Phoenix authorization requires biometric confirmation and a two-factor authentication code, Alina explained as her fingers moved across the keyboard. It'll take a few minutes to complete. What Blackstone couldn't see from his position was that Alina wasn't accessing the Phoenix system at all. Instead, she was activating a security protocol James had helped her install weeks earlier. A system designed to lock down the building and alert federal authorities in case of emergency. The building's emergency. Lighting suddenly activated, bathing everything in red as blast doors sealed the exits and cut off electronic communications. Blackstone spun toward Alina, raising his weapon. But she'd already dropped behind a server rack as the lights went out completely. In the conference room below, the security lockdown created the chaos James needed. Emergency power meant reduced lighting and confusion among Cross's men. James used the distraction to break free from his restraints. The zip ties had been looser than they appeared, deliberately positioned by Elena's security protocol to give him mobility when the moment came. The first guard went down silently. Precisely applied sleeper hold, rendering him unconscious before he could raise an alarm. James claimed the man's weapon and tactical vest. Transforming from captive to hunter in seconds, Cross realized the trap closing around them and ordered his remaining men to eliminate James immediately. What followed was a running battle through the darkened corridors of Titan Industries, with James using his intimate knowledge of the building's layout to outmaneuver opponents who had superior numbers but inferior training. Meanwhile, Alina played a deadly game of cat and mouse with Blackstone. In the server room, her knowledge of the building's systems gave her advantages in the darkness, but Blackstone's desperation made him dangerous and unpredictable. You foolish girl, Blackstone snarled as he searched for her among the server racks. Your father was just as stubborn, and look where it got him. Lena's anger blazed at the confirmation of her father's murder. She'd been moving quietly through the shadows, but now she spoke from the darkness with steel in her voice. My father built something worth dying for. You're just a traitor who sells out his country for money. Blackstone fired at the sound of her voice, but Alina had already moved. Using the maintenance passages James had shown her, she worked her way behind Blackstone's position. the federal response arrived with overwhelming force. FBI tactical teams, Pentagon security specialists, and local SWAT units surrounded the building. As Elena's lockdown protocol transmitted evidence files directly to federal servers, even if Cross's team managed to escape with the Phoenix technology, it would find it worthless. Elena had uploaded corrupted code that would render the system inoperable. The final confrontation occurred in Titan's main lobby, where Cross made his last stand with the remaining members of his team. James arrived first, having systematically eliminated the other operatives. But he was outnumbered and wounded from his fights throughout the building. Elena reached the lobby just as Cross was preparing to execute James rather than risk capture. Without hesitation, she stepped into the line of fire. "Let him go!" she called out. "I'm the one with the authorization codes you need." Cross swung his weapon toward Elena, but James used the distraction to make his final move. Years of special operations training culminated in a perfectly executed tactical maneuver that neutralized Cross while protecting Elena from harm. As FBI, agents flooded the building and secured the remaining conspirators. Elena and James found themselves alone in the aftermath of the violence that had nearly destroyed everything they cared about. New beginning 6 months later, Elena stood before a federal judge in a packed courtroom, delivering victim impact testimony. That would help ensure Richard Blackstone, David Coomer, and Patricia Wells receive sentences commensurate with their treason. Victor Cross and his surviving operatives had already been convicted. Under anti-terrorism statutes, the conspiracy had been even larger than initially suspected, involving defense contractors, foreign intelligence services, and corrupt officials across multiple government agencies. The investigation and trials had made headlines worldwide, establishing Elena as a symbol of corporate integrity and patriotic courage. Titan Industries had not only survived the scandal, but thrived under Elena's leadership. The company's commitment to ethical business practices and national security had attracted new contracts and partnerships. The Phoenix defense system, once compromised by traitors, had been successfully deployed and was protecting American forces around the world.